Hey guys, I'm back! Yay! Yeah, I know this is getting kind of stupid, but let me explain, because this is actually legit. If any of you guys are following my Twitter, which you should be following my Twitter to know what the fuck I'm doing in my life, then some of you may know, the 2% of you, will know that I had hardware issues and editing issues, and these editing issues came down to my graphic card. The problem with my new graphics card is that it was old, it was out of date, and it just wasn't going to survive, so I needed a new graphics card, and that's when I depended on my Patreon for. And just as I said before, a long time ago, everything in the Patreon goes straight back into the YouTube, and that's when you guys came and stepped up, and now I have a new graphics card, and I can't thank you enough. But what led me to get the graphics card was a whole series of problems that was just really unbelievable. So my computer couldn't go past the splash screen for a long time, weeks even. I had no idea what to do. I was kind of in a situation.
Okay, watch this. Alright, it turns on, right? There it goes, right? Here it comes, right? And that's it. It stays on that screen. It stays on that screen, and I have that little B2 in the corner. It just stays on this screen. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea.
So, I decided to change out my power supply, and that wasn't it. That didn't solve anything. So, a couple more days go by, I get a new motherboard. And I thought it was the motherboard. I honestly did. It worked for 3 days, just like that. I was like, okay, I can get back to work. So for 3 days, thought there was no problem. Then it just blanked out. It was done. I couldn't even get to the splash screen. It went up for 3 seconds and then it died. Now I was gonna tweet about that, but I was at, fuck it, I'll figure this out myself. But first, let's figure out how to upgrade my computer so we can be ready when I get a new motherboard, because I thought it was the motherboard at the same time. And it wasn't, it was the graphics card. So, went over to Patreon because of you guys, and this new graphics card that I got, that was it. That was all that needed to be done, was change out the graphics card. Because of the old one actually fucking up my computer, I was actually able to get back on, and here we are! Me recording in the middle of the night, and I can't thank you guys enough. Like, seriously, because of Patreon, I was actually able to upgrade my computer with a new graphics card. So anybody out there who's willing to start looking at the Patreon, perhaps, you know, helping me out with that, I would be incredibly grateful. And also, you know, follow my Twitter, obviously, because none of you guys wouldn't have known, since, you know, I posted a lot of this shit on Twitter. So, yeah. Twitter and Patreon. You should probably go check those out. Both of them Zinkweaver. And maybe we should get on with the subject at hand. Video games have all sorts of challenges and trials that put the gamer in for quite a ride. One such challenge is the game's isolated area of harder or unique enemies with challenges and puzzles that make it hard for the player to progress. In most games, this is called a dungeon. Dungeons in video games make it that much more challenging for the player to progress through the game, and can be a source of fun in a big way. It can be as easy as being led through a bedsheet of retractable spikes by a goat mother, or as hard as a monster-filled hallway with little room to breathe, as fun as being able to figure out a very well-designed puzzle, or vice versa, as aggravating with an annoying, complicated, bullshitty one. Well, in this case, we don't have the whole bullshitty concept going on here, but we do have Final Fantasy XIV. Some are hard, complicated, not very puzzling, but can be tons of fun. It leads me to ask 2 questions, however. Which is my favorite dungeon, because I asked myself the very question when I was playing online the other day. Some dungeons were very well designed, and I do have a lot of fun going through some of them when I used to play this game on a daily basis. There were some dungeons that had me saying, oh shit, that was fun. Sometimes I screamed my head off because some damn toad killed us repeatedly because the tank thought it was a good idea to just run out there, hopped up on coffee or some shit. And sometimes it was the DPS, and you know who you are. Some dungeons had me awed how beautifully crafted the world was, or how in depth they put it into the story, or how crazy the bosses were when we encountered them, or how stupid it was when I died off of some bullshit that was clearly a result on some dumb lag on my part, and not because I didn't make it into a shield or something. This is my top 10 dungeons that I personally find the best in 14. Of course, this is my opinionated list that I myself have come to conclusion with. My experiences are all on my own and will differ from everyone else, I think. So if you don't see a dungeon that you like on this list, then I'm sorry, but our opinions differ, my friend. There are rules, however. There are no 8-person dungeons. We're going to stick with the 4-person dungeon because those are more numerous, and I think those are more traditional to the MMO style of dungeon running. And no big raids like the Void Ark or the Praetorium. Raids are just incredibly huge, and I just can't count those in. Those have a separate kind of joy to them, so maybe I'll do a list for that. It'll probably be a top 5 or something. No guild hest, obviously, since they aren't really dungeons. They're just small little trials. No trials because you're basically fighting a boss, and no story instances because those are story instances and not dungeons. I'll also judge the dungeons by certain factors. The importance of the dungeon. How important are they towards the story and the world overall? How well designed it is, of course. How fun the dungeon is, and how it looks aesthetically, because, you know, why look at something bland, right? So without further ado, let's start with number 10. Now I know what you're thinking, so let me explain.
Really, dude? The first dungeon, Sastasha? Seriously? The easiest without you even trying? You can do it at like level 30 by yourself? This dungeon is number 10? Seriously, man?
Yes. Problem?
No, not really.
Right. Sastasha is number 10 for its sheer and utter importance to the player. This isn't just the easiest dungeon or the first dungeon, this is the first mandatory dungeon everyone must go through. Everyone. As you go through your first few hours of 14, you get the gist of the game, the quest, area locations, how it's played, how to fight, how to manage yourself through this complicated as fuck menu. It does a fairly okay job at doing that. But a dungeon is something else. It is not done by yourself like you've been doing throughout the game so far with those quests and area locations and how you're playing and going through that complicated as fuck menu, which is still complicated as fuck even if they tried to upgrade that shit. You now have to work with others. And I think Sastasha is possibly one of the best dungeons you can ever start out with in any MMO. Okay, let's run this down. So upon realizing you have to work with others as you spawn in, you see already your first obstacle, a bat. A bat that must be taken care of as a team because you yourself cannot fight it by yourself. As a tank, you realize that it hits very hard, and as a DPS it has quite a lot of health that you have to go through from the bats that you fought outside the cave, and as a healer, you start to see your tank's health drop to this thing like no other, like it's an anvil or some shit, giving you the realization that you're in it for not just healing yourself anymore, but healing the tank and possibly the others if they fuck up, and that's only the first encounter. You start to find them in groups now, from one bat to a bat and a jellyfish to a bunch up to 3. You start to see that the path you take may become dangerous and unforeseen, and it may actually be easier to go the long way. You learn to spread your AoE aggros and AoE kills with the fireball spirits that come out of the clam's mouth when it spews it out. Okay, I don't understand this whole thing with the clam spewing out fireballs. It just destroys my disposition of disbelief. I know it's a fucking video game, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. You learn to explore your surroundings for hidden treasures with just rewards, and sometimes, and if you're paying attention to things, you get rewarded with quicker progression. You fight bosses that have simple moves to get you used to the moving when necessary and learning to focus on one object at a time. You start to see how rushing through a dungeon may or may not impede you or possibly kill you, because if you aggro too much, you might just die. It also has some pathways that allow you to skip some enemies entirely, giving you the opportunity to just go about your way. And it's here where you find that the boss is pretty much like your ultimate test. Everything that you remembered from the dungeon pretty much applies to the final boss of the dungeon. These bubbles are important because they spawn more mooks, but to avoid them, you as the healer or the DPS can take care of the business and return to the battle with less to deal with, or let it go and see the result of laziness. Now the boss isn't hard, it's the first final boss of the first dungeon, so you can pretty much kill it without using the limit break, but I like to call this boss the limit break test dummy. Why? Because it's so satisfying to use your limit break and just outright kill the final boss. So at this point, you're pretty much testing out when you should use your limit break, which is like the last eighth of its health. So this first final boss teaches you when to use the limit break at the final moments. So to reiterate, this dungeon is important, which is the reason why it's number 10 on the list. The first dungeon is one of the most important dungeons in any game, especially in an MMO, because it pretty much teaches you how to play the game. And this first dungeon in this MMO, one of the best. Now, I'm probably the only one who goes this deep into game design and function, but at a design point, this place is very well done if it's to be used for beginners. Not so beautiful to look at, but pleasing to the eye, and it certainly is very important for us and for them who are the new players to come into the game. We don't want to scare off all the new people who come into the game, and with that, I want to assure you guys that this is probably the longest explanation for a dungeon on the list. Not too sure about that, but on to number 9. Now I know I went on for a bit with the first one, so I'll make this brief. HAUKKE Manor, how the fuck do you say this name? God damn it. Look, I don't give a fuck about the name. Just hear me out. This is not a very impressive dungeon at all. Yeah, I went there. Let me be more specific.
Yes, please, be more specific. It's your list and you're slagging it off. Explain yourself, you dumb
Well, small little person whose name I don't know, the dungeon isn't very impressive in a design aspect, but only aesthetically. It's pretty boring to look at, but map-wise, it's pretty damn impressive. You actually scour the mansion from middle to bottom to top as you find a way to break the barrier and lay low the master of the mansion to expel the curse. Yeah, so about this curse, apparently a woman became enthralled with her own beauty and wanted to make that immortal. So she made a deal with a voidsent and got what she wanted by becoming a voidsent herself and pretty much causing the beauty and the beast effect to all of her subjects. The voidsent that she became was actually a succubus, and, well, funny thing about that, a succubus can only exist in that plane if they reanimate or possess a corpse of a very beautiful lady. So what I'm guessing here is that she actually died in some way, then became some sort of succubus or some sort of thing, but we do know that it is her in that body when you play the hard version of this mansion. What impresses me is how the dungeon teaches you many things along the way, like stunning the maidservants in order to stop their nightmare spell, or how it teaches you that exploration gives you just reward. However, one thing I do find weird is that this is the only dungeon that has you opt to use the return function to port you back to the entrance after you beat the second boss. Sizz, I guess. It is the only dungeon in the game that has you do that, so it's kind of strange. Even the hard mode doesn't even do that. In fact, it does it for you.
I'm still trying to get over the fact that these things were actually once beautiful women, and they're basically corpse that are reanimated by void scent. It's like the Beauty and the Beast, only they wake up looking like this.
So number 8 is the Dusk Vigil. This is considered the introduction to all dungeons you'll be going through in Heavensward. It's a basic dungeon that's pretty easy with standard bosses with some new mechanics, but it's not this that makes it number 8 on my list. What I love about this place is how it introduces the situation of Ishgard in its best, or worst scenario. The Vigil is overrun with frozen zombies and beasts that dwell within that are attracted to the darkness this dungeon hides. If you pay any attention to the lore to this place, for which I know none of you do, you'd know that some time ago a platoon made residence within these walls. They safeguarded this place from many of its enemies, however, what they didn't see coming was the enemy within. The captain of said platoon actually brought down a curse for which the rest of the platoons tried to stop him, however they failed to do so, and instead were devoured by the curse along with the captain himself. The Vigil was then abandoned, and they were left for dead, and all that was left were their frozen corpse, lootable armor, and beasts who were attracted to the darkness.
But if their armor was lootable, doesn't that mean that the first set of dungeon loot in Heavensward are actually cursed?
Nah, wouldn't think that deep into it. The Lost City of AMDAPOR. Filled to the brim with fungus and overgrowth, the Lost City of AMDAPOR makes its way to number 7 as a dungeon I thoroughly have fun with. This side dungeon that you could ignore, but you won't, is needed in order for you to do the mock raid dungeon like the Void Ark. But not only that, the sheer presence of history and awe is what this dungeon show very well. It shows that a city once stood here as something quite important. In fact, the important city belonged to the white mages who did battle against the void mages of Mach and the scholars of Nim. However, Mach cast a powerful void scent into the epicenter of the city to bring it down. That very being was known as Diablo, the not so scary one. The mobs you face are nothing less from what an abandoned and yet cursed city would have. You've got those creepy gremlin things, those fungus things with 1,000 eyes, you got a whole bunch of giant insects everywhere, and a few trapped chests here and there. It's just a whole shit show of weird things all over the place. As the citizens left to establish what would today be called Gridania, the city of AMDAPOR became populated with insects and beasts that thrived off lingering magic and darkness. You make your way down to find remnants of an old war with void scents who were locked in place due to ancient traps of AMDAPOR design. The boss with Diablo himself is actually pretty fun, but in this stage of the game, his ultimate can be tanked. But story-wise, he's pretty much a badass. One of the biggest disappointments for me, however, was the fact that Diablo came out as a dungeon boss and not a primal boss or anything like that. He didn't become some sort of legendary boss that you had to fight, or a summon in that case, and that really made me sad. Less it to say, however, Square Enix did a good job in the design of this dungeon. I had a lot of fun fighting the monsters and getting to know the city. It has good atmosphere, and I'm pretty sure if you looked into its history and lore, you'd find a lot of interesting things. Number 6 is the Wanderer's Palace Hard Mode. This place has to have one of my favorite all-time dungeon themes in the game. Whenever this dungeon came up back in the day, I was like, oh hell yeah, I love this place. Huh, kinda sounded like I had an orgasm. That's a little strange. The sheer fun you have fighting against these particular enemies goes without saying that they are fun to hate and kill. Now, I don't like tomberries who have become these things' slaves and victims, but I outright hate slavery of any kind, so wiping them off the face of the planet was a sort of joy for me. So there are 3 key things that really shouts at me when I play this dungeon: the dungeon mechanics, the boss design, and the aesthetics. The mechanics of the idols have you actually pulling the mobs out of their red circle, whereas they're hitting you harder and it's harder to kill them. The fun design of the bosses means that all 3 of them are actually quite unique. The first boss, the second boss, and the third boss are actually quite unique and fun to handle. And last but not least, the place looks freaking fantastic. Now, it's a little bleak and it's not beautiful by all means, but it's a very interesting place to look at it, especially after when these guys get a handle on it. But beyond that, I have to say that the dungeon itself is much more fun than its tomberry infested counterpart. No giant tomberry out to kill you, no lantern shenanigans, just you, the team, your obstacle of a billion mobs, a last boss that's pretty fun to handle, and a kick-ass background theme. And you know what? I don't think the tomberries are all that bad. I mean, when you beat the final boss, you actually get to celebrate with them, and what are they? Oh. Okay. Alright, they just need to keep 50 meters away from me. That's all. Okay, so I'm gonna have to stop it here. Yes, this is the midway point. I'm actually going to make this into a 2-parter. It was originally gonna be a really long 30-minute video, but nah, I just don't want to do that. So I'll see you guys in part 2, and by God, those tomberries, oh my God, look at that shit. My God, they're just, oh my, Jesus Christ, man. Oh.
See you guys in part 2.
Jesus. Oh. I mean, how do you even stick a knife up there without it even bleeding? I mean, that's so weird.